Have you ever had one of those pieces of media that you experienced during childhood, whether that may be a game, movie, or something else, only to grow up and think to yourself, wait, was that actually real, or was it just some fever dream that I had? For me, it was the 2005 direct-to-video film MirrorMask, a trippy, creepy fever dream of a movie which I spent years wondering if it actually existed or not. I was unable to remember its name too, which made finding anything about it on the internet rather difficult. It wasn't until adulthood that I was able to finally, after all this time, rediscover it again. MirrorMask is a dark fantasy film directed by Dave McKean and written by Neil Gaiman, created in the spirit of Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal. In fact, it was originally conceived as a direct sequel to Labyrinth before becoming its own thing. It stars Stephanie Leonidas, Jason Barry, Rob Brydon, and Gina McKee, with a soundtrack composed by Ian Bellamy, which, might I add, is probably the most perfect soundtrack imaginable for a movie like this. It's definitely cherry on top when it comes to the film's atmosphere. This movie utterly entranced me when I was a kid. I remember not really understanding the story back then or paying much attention to it much, but I was so strongly pulled in by the film's unique atmosphere and visuals that I couldn't help but just rewatch it over and over. To this day, I still admire MirrorMask for its uniqueness. Sure, the story is quite simple, but the themes are certainly interesting, and its film's identity is one that I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like before or since. Part of my motivation for creating this video is due to the fact that I don't really see many people talk about this film on the internet. Sure, you've got a few retrospectives here and there, but that's about it. For the most part, MirrorMask feels somewhat obscure, so I wanted to put something out there, bring some more awareness to this film and see if there's anyone out there who might have the same fondness for it that I do. So, what's MirrorMask about? Well, let's get into it. Even though Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal served as the main inspirations for this movie, the story of MirrorMask also reminds me a lot of The Wizard of Oz. I wouldn't be too surprised if it also served as inspiration for the film. The protagonist is a young girl named Helena, whose parents own a circus, though unlike her parents, she has no desire to be a part of the family business, instead wanting nothing more than to run away and live a life of her own. Helena's mother, Joanne, collapses and is taken to hospital not long after a heated argument with her daughter. Joanne is now required to undergo an operation, and Helena can't help but blame herself for her mother's circumstances, wondering if she somehow caused this. One night, Helena encounters three mysterious masked performers. They're attacked by a malicious, shadowy threat, killing all but one of the performers, who is named Valentine. Valentine and Helena are forced to escape by fleeing into another world named the City of Light, where Valentine lives. This new world she has found herself in is mysteriously reminiscent of her drawings, which you can see put up all over her bedroom walls. It is almost as if this world is literally her drawings brought to life. There is a reason why MirrorMask is so similar to The Wizard of Oz, aside from the fact that the story is about the protagonists somehow finding themselves in a completely different, fantastical world. Most of the characters Helena meets in the City of Light bear resemblance to people she knows from her world, most notably the Queen of Light, who resembles Joanne. The Queen of Light is in a similar condition to Joanne. She is trapped in a state of unnatural sleep after a character who resembles Helena, a princess from the Land of Shadow, stole a charm from the city. That charm is none other than the MirrorMask. Helena and Valentine must go on a quest, journeying to the Land of Shadow in order to recover the stolen mask and awaken the Queen from her sleep before the world is consumed by shadows. I'll leave my summary of the story there as not to spoil what happens next, but for now, what I've described should hopefully be enough to give you an understanding of the film's premise. The story of MirrorMask is a coming-of-age story which explores a couple main themes, most notably the relationship between parent and child. Helena and the Princess of Shadows are teenagers currently going through a very transformative time of their lives, striving for independence and individuality, wanting nothing more than to become their own person. Unfortunately for the both of them, their mothers are quite controlling, unwilling to let their daughters grow up so quickly, wanting to keep them close and safe, refusing to let them grow. This is the main conflict of MirrorMask, and it fuels all of the events that occur in the story. It's also a conflict that is not unfamiliar to a lot of people, including myself, as I imagine a lot of us have experienced similar conflicts with our parents during adolescence. I feel like the message of the movie is that both parent and child need to find common ground, come to an understanding, because it's unproductive to push your child away by trying to coddle them and pull them in, yet it is also unproductive to go behind your parents' backs, breaking their trust and putting yourself through so much self-destruction. The other theme worth noting, due to the fact that it ties into the previous one, is the duality between light and dark. The Princess of Shadows in particular represents Helena's shadow self. It's literally in the name, so go figure, I guess. The Queen of Shadows also represents Joanne's shadow self, whereas the comatose Queen of Light represents, you guessed it, her good side. The Queen of Light is portrayed as a lot more nurturing, loving, compassionate, and understanding, representing that side of a parent. Whereas the Queen of Shadows represents the more overprotective and obsessive side of a parent. Or at least this is how I personally interpret the movie. Maybe there's other messages that went over my head, but those two feel like the main ones. If you ask me, the standout aspect of this film is the overall tone, atmosphere, and artistic direction. It is what helps MirrorMask stand out and become more memorable than it otherwise would have been. What can I say? MirrorMask is a vibe. When it comes to this movie, it has a unique aesthetic that I haven't really seen in any other film before or after it. I mean, just look at the cats in this movie. Have you ever seen a cat that looks like this before? Nope. Well, what about these muscular birds with arms? Haven't seen anything like that before either? Figured as much. The character designs are also pretty great too. My favourite is probably the Queen of Shadows, just because I find her design to be the most detailed and visually interesting of all the characters in this movie. The Princess of Shadows also looks really cool. I mean, come on, take a look at these wanted posters. Super creepy. The world of MirrorMask has a surreal, dreamlike quality to it, to the point where it comes across as kind of eerie and uncanny at times. It's difficult trying to describe these visuals other than the obvious, such as the warm yet murky sepia tone, the fact that it comes across as otherworldly and hella trippy. MirrorMask feels familiar, yet at the same time, it also feels completely alien. It's also kind of creepy too. There's a few things in this movie that come across as pretty unsettling. I really like these aspects of the movie's aesthetic. They help make this world feel even more dreamlike. Some examples of the horror-like visuals in this movie are the giant floating head of the Queen of Shadows, and of course the close to you scene, which is honestly one of my favourite scenes in the whole movie. I believe that scene in particular was inspired by the short film Street of Crocodiles by the Quay brothers. I discussed the scene a bit more in depth, but I might not. Like I said earlier, I don't want to spoil too much of the movie. Besides, the song features a cover of Close to You by the Carpenters, and I don't want to risk getting a copyright strike or something if I showed it in full here. The more horror-like aspect of MirrorMask is yet another reason why I was so mesmerized by this movie as a kid, because I was drawn to all kinds of spooky things back then. When it came to scary or unsettling things, I wouldn't say I had a fear of the unknown, more like a fascination with the unknown. Hell, when I was growing up, my favorite part of A Christmas Carol was the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. I loved the whole Nazgul aesthetic he had going on. I was instantly drawn to it. But anyway, even though MirrorMask isn't necessarily a horror film by any means, I was still drawn to it because the film appealed to that side of my personality that was hungry for the unnatural and mysterious. Though, I have to say, I don't think the visual aesthetic of this movie would hit as hard as it does if it weren't for another aspect of this movie that I feel like doesn't get talked about as nearly as much as it should. The soundtrack. The soundtrack for MirrorMask has a very jazzy, bluesy sound to it, featuring saxophones, trumpets, cello, the occasional vocals, and more. For a movie with such moody and murky visuals, the soundtrack is often the opposite, coming across as very lively and energetic, such as the tracks named Mrs. Bagwell's Roomba, Monkey Birds, and Gorillas. The music is not always like that, however. There are still some tracks in the film that have a much more chill and relaxing sound to them. Some examples of this are the tracks named The Myth of Creation, The Library, and Running for the Bus. Then of course, finally, we have the tracks that are less jazzy and instead spookier, mysterious, and creepy, such as Giants Orbiting and In the Dark Forest. Playing into the creepier aspects of the soundtrack are the film's feature two songs, a cover of Close to You as mentioned before, and an original song titled If I Apologized. cover to Close to You is a stark contrast to the original song. The original had a very sweet, loving, and adoring feel to it, whereas the cover comes across as obsessive and manipulative, perfectly representative of how the Queen of Shadows doesn't truly respect her daughter. The Queen is far too possessive of the princess, treating her less like a person and more like an object, trophy, or pet. These themes are also further explored in the movie's original song, If I Apologize, which, for me, the lyrics read as if they're telling the story of a parent and their child in the aftermath of a quarrel, though I can't decide if it's supposed to be sung from the perspective of the parent or the child. I guess it could go either way. Both songs are very well made. I think my favorite is If I Apologized, but I also really enjoy all of the nuances in Close to You, as I feel like all of those small details featured in the song help create a much larger whole. In my eyes, MirrorMask is a very overlooked and underrated film. Even if it explores themes that other stories have before it, the execution is done in a way that is very distinct, unique, and memorable. I've got a lot of nostalgia for this movie. It was definitely one of the most memorable pieces of media from my childhood due to just how much of a fever dream it felt like. Now, in my adulthood, I feel like I appreciate the movie a lot more due to its artistic direction and overall creative vision. It feels like most people have never heard of this movie or have completely forgotten about its existence. So if you haven't seen this movie, then I hope my video on it has at least somewhat gotten you interested in checking it out. Or maybe you've already seen this movie. If you have, be sure to let me know what your thoughts are on it, or if there's anything I might have missed. But with that out of the way, thank you for checking out my video and seeing it through to the end.